Today on the show, I had Jesse Stewart. Jesse's a former U.S. Army Ranger officer. He medically retired at the age of 31. And after this, he went on to go found his own company called AM300 or American 300, which was to help prisoner of war missing in actions. And since then, he's became a speaker, a TEDx speaker, and an author. And his upcoming book is coming out called The Phoenix Project. And I encourage you to check it out. It'll be in the description below, as well as his website. And if you just listen to the whole episode, he's got a lot to say. He's a really inspirational figure. Thanks. Enjoy the show. All right, Jesse, how you doing today?
Not too bad. Down here in Dallas, Texas, enjoying this quarantine social distancing thing that I think I probably always somewhat adhere to one way or another. So it's kind of business as usual.
Yeah, for sure. Are you guys in lockdown over there?
So it's getting ready to be lifted here shortly. In fact, I think it may have been unofficially lifted today, and they're going to start opening businesses later this week. So it hasn't been that much of an effect to me, I guess. Obviously, I haven't done any speaking really since. I'm provided an opportunity to do quite a few podcasts, get caught up on stuff that otherwise hadn't had a chance to get to. But yeah, it's things we got to do in order to get through this.
Yeah, for sure. How do you feel about it being lifted? Are you for it or?
Um, I think there's benefits. Today they're just highlighting in the news, just the mental effects that the quarantine's been having on people. But at the same time, as a catch-22, you go too fast, it's going to introduce in a second wave. Go too slow, you're just going to force people into doing whatever they're going to do anyway. So there's no right answer to this. And obviously, I would hate to be in a position of political leadership right now to have to make these decisions, because I think whatever you do, people are going to pick it apart to find the wrongs or the rights to serve their individual needs. And so for me, it's just about looking for the next right thing to do, no matter what situation you're in. And that's the only way I think we can go forward.
Yeah, I think no matter what side of the party fence you're on, you're gonna get criticized either way. I
Yeah.
uh I saw on your Instagram page that there's a lot of golf. Do you golf a lot?
Yeah. Well, so I actually started playing golf this last year. And that kind of started after the snowboarding season was over for last year, which is my first year snowboarding, and needed something new to kind of keep going on. And started playing golf and had an opportunity to become a part of Brookhaven Country Club down here in Dallas. And had an opportunity to work with just some incredible people. It had a lot to do with Jordan Spieth growing up here. And when you get an opportunity to be around people that good, it's kind of hard not to progress. And so been playing probably a little more than a normal person will play.
That's good. So you golf and snowboard. Do you have any other hobbies?
Pretty much anything that'll keep me active. I grew up playing baseball for the most part, played all sports, wrestled, played football. But baseball was a passion, and I ended up deciding to go the Army route instead. And, I think just, through my gravitation towards, the Ranger community, any sport or competitive thing that's out there, I think I'll naturally gravitate to. But currently, as of right now, functional fitness is the foundation, but it manifests through sports, which happen to be currently right now golf. But my reason for playing golf is more about the presence aspect, because with golf, if you want to be good at it, you can't focus on that last bad shot you had, and you can't be worried about making the perfect shot for the next one. You just have to be present within that current shot. And that's if you want to be good or not totally suck at it. So I think that's kind of the attraction with golf for me.
Yeah. You ever try any martial arts?
Yeah, so did a lot of jujitsu, or we called it modern army combatives, I think is what we called it. And then we had some just great people from the jujitsu community that helped at Fort Bragg with bringing that in. And then did a little bit of jujitsu up in Colorado Springs, and was about to start it back up again. But this all ended up taking place. So definitely plan to get back into it once the quarantine is lifted. But those types of things probably be a little bit longer than most.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. That's the thing that I miss the most out of this so far is jujitsu.
Yeah, big fan of BJJ. Love the roll.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So you mentioned the military a little bit. How did you end up going that route?
Well, so my family has a long history of military service. first recorded one, at least for the United States, the great granddaddy times I think 14. It was one of Rogers Rangers. This was made famous by the movie The Patriot. So that was a group of guys from the French Indian War. And in fact, I have a hatchet on my display case right now that was from that relative. And so it was kind of just inspired through my family history that family came over here in the 1600s, and grandfather, served from the end of World War II to the beginning of the Vietnam War. My father served the end of Vietnam War up until giving me my first salute and pinning my Ranger tab on me, and then he retired, and then I served until I was medically retired after being wounded 4 times in 2012. So it's been in the family. There was definitely no pressure for me to do it, although if I ever wanted a chance at college or anything like that, that was probably the only route. But the Ranger kind of mentality always stuck with me, and so going the Army route was the way that I wanted to go. And tried to enlist when I was in high school, signed a Ranger contract, but both my parents haven't been enlisted people, and my father serving 30 plus years in the Navy. I was very encouraged to go the college route, and so I did. Initially was planning to go to West Point, play baseball, but due to some family health issues with my parents, I ended up staying at the University of Washington for at least that first year. So I went there and decided to just stay. And of course, 9/11 hit at the beginning of my senior year of college, and then became part of the first commissioning class after 9/11.
Yeah. So do you think that 9/11 had a big impact on you joining the military?
No, I mean, I was already in ROTC, right? So it was, I was going to go no matter what. I had family in New York City. In fact, I was in New York right before 9/11. Went up and had brunch top of the World Trade Center. If you go back to September 11th on my Instagram profile, you'll see a picture there of me up on top of the World Trade Center on 9/10/2001. So I was up there the day before. Flew back to University of Washington that day, and then woke up to the World Trade Center falling. And the way I looked at it was my aunt and uncle were targeted. And so all it did was really galvanize what I was already going to do and made it much more real. I'd already chose infantry as my branch. Had already set my eyes on Ranger School. So it wasn't much of a determining factor. I think the motivation to continue going deeper and deeper into it probably was. And had 9/11 not happened, I would have only probably done 4 years and gotten out. So there's definitely a little bit of inspiration, that brought that on, but I was planning to do it anyway.
I see. So how long after 9/11 did you end up going into the Rangers?
Yeah, so I was commissioned as part of the first commissioning class in June of 2002. So I had to finish up my senior year no matter what. And of course, many of us were trying to, enlist and get out and just get into the fight. But I ended up staying to get commissioned, about 9 months later. So I got commissioned. Usually, as an ROTC graduate, you got to wait about 6 months before you go on active duty. I was fortunate enough to start right away and head off to the infantry officer basic course. So I went there at Fort Benning for about 5 or 6 months and finished high enough within that to get an automatic Ranger School slot. So I went to Ranger School and then graduated from Ranger School in March-ish of 2003. Went straight to the 82nd Airborne Division and got a platoon right away and went over as part of the first efforts into Iraq in 2003, and had an opportunity to excel there. After being wounded a couple weeks into the deployment, my truck was blown off a bridge and went down with it, but was able to come out of that and right back into the fight, and gave me an opportunity to set myself apart just basically by not quitting and continuing to look for the next opportunity to do the right thing and continue forward through that deployment. And then after that was when opportunities kind of started coming up a little bit more often. I was part of a task force 300 as a senior lieutenant, and then ended up getting promoted to captain. We went over to Katrina because of our search and rescue capabilities as a junior captain, and had Anderson Cooper embedded with me. And so it gave me an opportunity to shine or fall flat on my face. And I guess I just didn't completely screwed up. And after that was when they offered me an early command. So I was going to get out of the military at that point. I was married to at the time. I promised her I was going to. And then when they offered me the opportunity to command within Task Force 300, I took it and ended up going back over to Iraq again, and then took command of Charlie Troop 573, which was part of Task Force 300, and that's where I did my command time at.
Yeah. So how long did you serve total?
Well, total serving was 10 years and 1 day. So I was wounded in Iraq again in 2007, March 17th, 2007, probably about a month after I'd taken over Charlie Troop, and ended up taking 18 pieces of shrapnel down the left side of my body,
Wow.
and continued fighting through that. And so by the time I got back from that deployment, I ended up having a complete reconstruction of my left knee after having one of the pieces go right through it. But once again, just fought through it, went right back to the fight, deployed again, had to come back, get it reconstructed once again. Did one more deployment, came back, had it reconstructed a third time, and then was selected early for major. Went to go do the Command and General Staff College. Got selected to be the aide to the Commanding General of Iraq through that. With follow-on assignment right back to the Ranger Regiment. But right before going on the deployment, they went in to check my knee one more time just to make sure it was going to be all right. And I woke up realizing they had done another reconstruction. At that point was when they informed me that I was being medically retired. So after 4 reconstructions, they medically retired me as a major, and had the incredible opportunity to get 2 master's degrees while I was on active duty, one in business and then one in history, which was the fellowship that I did at the Command and General Staff College, but ended up being all for nothing as I kind of expended my physical plane of existence and ended up retiring. Got a full retirement at the age of 31 in the rank of major.
Yeah. So how hard was that to do school and be in special forces at the same time?
It wasn't that big of a deal because as a major, so up until then, usually in the Army, as an officer, they let you go away to school. So you do, the Army kind of treats the education system similar to like civilian colleges. So like your basic course is like your associate's of arts degree. Your command or your captain's career course is like your bachelor's degree, and then the Command General Staff College is your master's degree. Well, I never had an opportunity to do the captain's career course because I got put into command before that, and then ended up getting promoted to major, at least a promotable status, before they could send me the course. So they ended up waiving it for me. And so when I got to the Command General Staff College, that was my first break from 2002 to 2010. And at that point, they knew they needed to let me take a knee for a period of time, which did not sit well with me. And so I continued to just do what I could to set myself apart, and but got the master's degree. Was planning to immediately go back to the fight, but that was taken away. And I'd say it was probably harder to find out that my career was suddenly done, because up until that point, my entire identification as a person, it wasn't as somebody asked me like, "Who are you?" The right answer would probably be like, Jesse Stewart. I'm a father of 2 girls. I've got a wife, and I happen to be an Army Ranger or an infantry officer. Well, for me, it was backwards. It was, my name is, I'm a Army Ranger commissioned officer who happens to be a father and happens to be a spouse, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so for me, leaving the military suddenly like that, that was equivalent, and why I think I probably resonated off the bat with some of the Olympic athletes I work with is their entire identity is wrapped around being a professional snowboarder or skier, and I was the same way in my capacity in the military. And so that journey to kind of get out of that was about a 5-year process that lasted from 2012 to 2017. Because when I went in the civilian world, all of a sudden the standards that I lived in for the past 10 years were no longer generally accepted. That was a tough thing to deal with, and internally, professionally, mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. And so it was a rough road coming out of that.
Yeah, for sure. I noticed that a lot of people in the military in general, they identify themselves with their career, which I guess that happens uh, with careers in general, but especially in the military, like people have a really hard time transitioning afterwards because that's all they kind of know.
Well, exactly, and I'm very careful to not think that this is anything special just to me, but I think it's exacerbated a little bit within the communities that are considered elite, or at least we consider ourselves elite, where For instance, like going to VA and someone will say that comes from my community and be like, well, no one can help me because they don't understand where I'm from. They didn't serve, or they didn't deploy, or they weren't in combat arms, or they weren't a ranger or a SEAL or something like that. All of a sudden, that becomes a very small hill at the top that you're there all by yourself, and having to kind of strip that down and peel that back was absolutely critical to me finding some healing as well. So yes, it is tough. I think within our community, it becomes a little tougher, and honestly, it's the reason why so many guys from my background just struggle once they get out.
Yeah. Yeah. So what was like the thought process, right? So you find out that you're retiring. What were you thinking to do next?
Well, I honestly didn't know. I mean, I knew I was marketable, with already luckily having my MBA. And I mean, the master's in history was just nice because I had an opportunity to do a fellowship under General Stanley McChrystal and General Bob Caslin. And so I knew I was marketable, but the thought of going into a world where all of a sudden I'd have to reprove myself was tough. But I applied, to several civilian jobs, had a lot of opportunities to pick from. Ended up retiring in Phoenix, Arizona, which probably wasn't the best terrain to start off with after the amount of time that I spent in the Middle East. But it had its struggles because I couldn't understand why people did not want to be at work at 5 a.m. in the morning, and understand why they did not want to miss their kids' baseball games to get projects done. And it was a struggle. It was a struggle that, I first two bosses that I had after I retired ended up leaving the company I worked for, and later found out it was because of me and my personalities not being comfortable or not feeling safe. And that was a driving reason behind starting my own company initially, was I didn't want to make anybody feel that way. And so it was tough. And I've gone back and made a lot of amends and a lot of apologies to some of the people that had to deal with me, especially right after getting out of retirement. So it was a process. It was a process, and it's still a process even to this day, because I mean, I still miss it. But just now I'm understanding that all those things that I went through, were part of the process that have brought me here to the point now where I can do what I do now, which is, lead AM300 and try and live out my mission statement, which is develop, collaborate, and deliver hard fought wisdom, for winning in life. And that's the understanding that, while my story is different, it's not necessarily unique. It's just different. But when it's brought together with other stories of whether it be a U.S. snowboarder or a U.S. alpine skier or a venture capitalist or just a stay-at-home mom, any of those things, individually are neat, but brought together collectively, they can help solve some real problems.
Yeah, and what exactly is your company, AM300?
Yeah, so AM300, the process of that, and I was just outlining that for somebody the other day, is that it initially started off as the American 300, which was a nonprofit that I had started back in 2009 to try and raise scholarships for the 14. There were 14 guys from my unit of Charlie Troop, 22 overall from the task force, that died in 2007. And so the mission of AM 300, American 300, was to raise scholarships. Well, I ended up combining forces with something called the Warrior Tours, which is still active to this day. And deal was, if they could take my name and kind of the brand behind the Task Force 300, which is where the 300 came from, then they would help me raise the funds. And so we did that. I ended up parting ways and letting them keep the name, and they're still active today and still bringing world-class athletes to military bases, overseas, and doing all sorts of events. And so the name, the American 300, was my initial way of trying to kind of deal with the trauma that I had left behind, thinking that if I just provided scholarships for all these kids, all the feelings of pain and loss would suddenly be gone. Well, the day after we raised the money for the 16 scholarships, how much better I felt? None. Like, I realized that emptiness was still there. And so when I started my own company, the mission of that company was an RFID tech company where I developed some technology to track soldiers on the battlefield, track equipment on the battlefield, et cetera. And so I named that AM300 Solutions, which was just essentially short for American 300, not wanting to take away from that great work that Robbie Powers and the team over there was doing. And so it started AM300 Solutions under that auspice of providing the RFID tech. And it started out very successful. And, you know, the idea of being able to track every single soldier on the battlefield, from pilots to, to rangers, to other special operators, to, the transportation person that might be at risk of veering off path or something. And the idea was we'd be able to get a 10-digit grid to anywhere somebody was in theater to be able to attempt to rescue them if they were captured. And so it started up with that. And unfortunately, as soon as I got my first contract, I ended up starting a divorce process that just, was kind of the final straw that crippled me. And through that process, the people that were supporting me saw what it was doing to me, and how I was trying to use that to make up for what I'd gone through in combat. And they all encouraged me, hey, Jesse, you know what, lay it down, let it dissolve. So I ended up giving the patent away to the United States government, and who knows what they'll end up doing with it someday. But that's where I started, my healing process. Luckily, I had my retirement, and so I was able to turn inward and start figuring out what was going on. And in June of 2017, so this is post-divorce, post giving up the company, in its initial state, the number of suicides from my unit matched the number that I had lost. And so I made the decision that, realizing that if I didn't do something, I was going to become one of those statistics. And so I ended up going to found the worst rated VA treatment center in the country, because it was the easiest one to get into, and went there for a 30-day period. Now, at this point, I was drinking, man, probably 2 1/5 of Jack Daniels a day just to function, and knew that it was somewhere that it was going to take me that was not going to be good. And the worst part about it is, when I got my patent approved by the government, I was maintaining that. When I was, initially working with some of these Olympic athletes, I was maintaining that and could get away with producing enough to make people happy, get through workouts somehow. And I knew that it was somewhere that was leading me somewhere bad. And so I submitted myself, and it was important that I went to the same resources that I knew my guys would have available to me. So that's how I ended up at this VA place. And leading up to then, when I work with these Olympic athletes, what I would always tell them is just say, hey, listen, in the Army Rangers and pretty much any special operations unit, it's all about the physical. No one cares about the mental plane of existence, emotional plane, or spiritual plane. It's all about the physical. Well, at some point, you're going to get hurt. You're going to encounter setback. And I know, had I been more balanced on these planes, I probably would have been able to bounce back better, the typical resiliency story. And so when I showed up there, obviously wasn't living that. And when I showed up there, got into the place, and the VA said, wow, you're the highest ranking person that's ever come here. You're the, first Ranger we've had. And I just said, hey, I'm here as a vet. I'm not special. I just want to figure out what the heck is going on and create some space. So I ended up getting locked in a room while I was waiting to get in processed. And there was a whiteboard in there. And I just sat down at the whiteboard, and I thought to myself how, the VA way was not going to work for me. Some, 12-step way was not going to work. The CrossFit way was not going to work. And, to this day, still somewhat ashamed, spiritual way wasn't going to work. So I sat down at the board, and I just simply wrote down, the 4 principles that I talked to my athletes about, because some of them were having some really good success. A couple of them making it much higher than they were anticipated to for that Olympic cycle. And so I wrote down all the resources that I had across the mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual planes of existence. And after a couple hours of just writing, that whiteboard was almost full. And as I look back, I realized I was covering up one of the planes of existence. I could not write down a single resource I had under the emotional plane of existence. And so I was not going to let myself leave until I wrote at least one resource down. And I recalled one of the guys complaining about having to go to 12-step groups every night. And while I wasn't a big fan of that concept, I said, you know what? Make a goal of every night, go in, having a good attitude, and trying to make at least one friend there and just talk to them. Make them feel better about themselves, whatever. And so as I wrote that down, I kind of made like an internal deal with the whiteboard. Because the only thing that I hated worse than drinking or the trauma that I was experiencing at the time was white space on a calendar or a whiteboard. And so I wrote down, under the emotional 12-step groups. And when I did that, I had what can only be described as like an LSD influenced vision, having, never encountered that type of stuff before, of, a Phoenix project rising up in front of me. And along with that, watching all the things that I consider to be success in my life, the college opportunity, the baseball opportunities, the Ranger, all the things identified as success, rising up simultaneously with this Phoenix bird, and all of a sudden it just all bursting into a ball of fire and going down to ashes. I remember having just the absolute worst feeling of depression and sadness watching this. But then all of a sudden, out of those ashes came a Phoenix bird of something better than what I'd just seen. And that was when I realized, if I truly wanted to come out of what I'd been through, I needed to leave all those things that I was proud of and that I hung my hat on behind and allow something new to come out of that. And that's when the Phoenix Project started, was at that VA in June of 2017. And have since been, finding my own way to come back through the mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual planes of existence. And shortly after that was when I got asked to come back and speak at US Ski and Snowboard again. And I kind of told the story, started helping some of the athletes with tailoring their training to, work along the same methodology. A couple of them did a lot better than they were anticipated to in the Olympic cycle. And so it got a little bit more attention. And that was, I got asked to come back and speak post-Olympics at their big Olympic summit. And then that's what led to TED Talk and then the opportunity to write the book.
Right. So that kind of epiphany, that's what inspired you to become a speaker and start sharing your message.
Yeah, well, I don't think it wasn't like a decision like, okay, I'm going to speak about this. It was just simply about me just trying to do the next right thing by myself, because up until then, like Oscar, I thought I needed to like just help everybody else in the world be the best version of themselves, and then I would somehow get to myself at the end. And in June of 2017, that's when I decided to just turn it inward. And then the result of that was the opportunity to share the story. And then the opportunity to be asked on a different stage, at some points, bigger stages, to share those stories. So it was never a decision to like go into it. It was something that just kind of manifested from the slow rebuild of attempting to do, a lot of small things very well and then allow them to come together.
I see.
Yeah. So if you're looking for a quick, like a recipe on how to become a speaker or how to become an author, I'm definitely not the right person to ask. Or, if you can look at it from the perspective of whatever your thing in life is that you do, if you do, those small things really, really, really well, people are going to gravitate to you and want to know, what it is, that you did in order to be successful. But for me, that's how the process started. And I wouldn't go as far as to call it a calling or anything, but for me, it was something that just kind of fell into place.
Yeah, I think that's a really good sign of a good leader, is that you went to that VA clinic, the same one, and tried to get better through that, even though you had other means.
Yeah, and keep in mind, man, I had TRICARE, I had private insurance. I did not have to go there, and I think the decision was, it wasn't to to show the VA up or anything, or to say that I could beat their system. It was just that, I wanted to just kind of get back to the basics, like keep it simple. Use the resources everybody else has. Stop making yourself feel, or in my case, myself feel special. Use the basics. And something that I do try to speak about a lot is the emphasis on excellence over success. Success is winning an event. It's winning a race. It's winning a medal or a podium slot for these, as Olympians. Excellence is about doing the small things to a ridiculously high standard and repeating it over and over again, and using that as a lifestyle. That all of a sudden success becomes a natural byproduct of the things you just do every day.
Yeah. Kind of go back a little. The VA system, do you
Mm-hmm.
think it's effective?
Okay, so to keep both of us out of the crosshairs of anyone on either side of that issue, let's just put it this way. Rather than relying on the VA to show me a way, I found a way to make the VA part of my way. And I think that if you and I sat here long enough, we could probably build a case to have the VA shut down. I think any veteran probably.
Yeah, definitely.
However, what I have found is a way, because we talk about the mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual planes of existence. I found a way to make the VA an effective part of my mental plane of existence and regrowth. And once I was able to get there, it made dealing with the VA a lot easier, and it allowed me to use them as a resource or a consultant in my overall mission.
That makes sense.
And you know what? There are a lot of really screwed up things that happen at the VA. And man, if you were to put me in the Mayo Clinic, right, one of the best hospitals in the country, I could probably find 9 out of 10 things that were wrong and they should be shut down for. It's, I think, a gift that I have. So you put me in the VA, I'll find you 9 out of 10 things that the government could come and shut them down. Problem was, I was missing that 1 out of 10 thing that may have been a game changer for me or for one of my friends that truly needed it. And once I was able to shift that mindset to putting the same amount of effort into looking for that one thing as I wasn't identifying the 9, that's when I started finding the real and true ways to help catapulting, my recovery from what I've been through. And that's what I encourage other fellow veterans to treat the VA as.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess, I mean, it would be more internal and kind of like a resource.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it as like, you're the CEO of your life, and your life is this amazing thing that's going to go out there and impact people. Well, you've got to find, people or things within to help, augment those resources. Like in a business, you have your marketing department, you have your sales department, you have your IT department, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I found a way to make the VA part of that and understand and recognize their limitations, but acknowledge there are some resources there that can really help. And that's how I was able to get there with the VA. Because man, if you're waiting for the VA way to save your life, good luck. But I think you can say that for any resources out there. I mean, look at the amount of people that spend $100,000 to go to Passages or something like that down in California, whatever those beachfront resorts are. Well, what's their success rate? Not much higher than the VA. And so, if you can find a way to make those resources part of your journey, that's where I think people will start seeing a lot more effectiveness.
Yeah. So where at in this process did you become a professor?
So the professor portion, that was actually before. So I taught at Grand Canyon University. It's probably about 6 months after I retired, I was approached by the dean of the business school. He's a retired Air Force gentleman, retired Colonel Robert Gibbs, I believe is his name. And I got asked to apply for it. And I thought, well, what a great opportunity to kind of share some of these, Ranger principles to young college students. Well, my first class I taught was called Servant Leadership, and my class is, I think there was 97 students in it, 80 of them that were female. Well, guess what? They wanted to hear nothing about Army Ranger principles and leadership, and so that was an incredible learning experience for myself. Of like, how do I take these principles that I know have been effective, and translating them into a language that people understand, especially 18 to 22-year-old females for the most part. And so I did that, and it was a very rewarding experience, and did it on campus for about a year and a half. And then I taught for another year when I moved up to Colorado as an adjunct professor, kind of online, and have maintained the connection. I'm not actively teaching, but it was a great opportunity. And I still, I've used it as a learning experience that's helped shape who I am. And that was also the first time I'd ever worked with females in my life, as a 33-year-old college professor.
Yeah, that's actually where I go to college right now.
Okay. Well, yeah, if you see, no, I think, is it Randy? I think it's actually Randy Gibbs. If you see him, tell him I said hello. And I'm sorry for all the problems I caused while I was there.
You have an upcoming book, is that correct?
Yes. So I have, there's actually a couple books coming out. There's the Phoenix Project, which is the main one. And that's the one coming out this fall. And that's one that highlights, kind of chronicles, my journey of why I chose to go the route that I went. As a pursuing the Army Ranger path. If you look at all special operations, in fact, I just listened to a podcast the other day with Jocko, Wilnick, and John Kim, Dr. John Kim. And Dr. Kim is the first man in history to have ever been a Navy SEAL, a doctor, MD, and an astronaut. And listening to his story is absolutely amazing. But it's the same story as most of us. Come from a screwed up childhood, of an abusive, father or stepfather. In my case, it was a stepfather. That kind of drove me into that culture and that environment. So the Phoenix Project kind of highlights that journey of why I went there, and then kind of lead up to the Phoenix Project, and then talking about the application for the regrowth. So that's the Phoenix Project, and that's the main thing. There's another book coming out. It's going to be called Unwinnable Wars, and it's kind of a prelude teaser to the Phoenix Project. And it's something I wrote while I was in the Army about counterinsurgency. Had an incredible opportunity to do a fellowship there where I got to travel all around the world and interview some of the leading authorities and on counterinsurgency. And what I found is the more consulting I've done, the more I've gone back to those principles of fighting a counterinsurgency to help people understand how to deal with difficult situations and difficult people. And so we're going to publish that initially, and that should be out in July. And then essentially kind of get some excitement up around the Phoenix Project. The Phoenix Project's the main one. It'll be coming out in the fall. Be available for pre-order, I believe, starting in July. And it can be found on AM300.com or Amazon, or I guess Barnes and Noble, wherever books are sold. But yes, that's the deal. The book's coming out this fall, the Phoenix Project.
Awesome. Can't wait for it to come out. Did you mentioned that a lot of these figures come from kind of broken homes. Is that kind of your situation?
Um, yeah, I mean, I'm careful. I mean, I look back on it, it was just the normal. But, my parents divorced when I was 5 years old. I did not see my father for a long time after that divorce. We moved from Florida up to Washington State. In fact, the last thing I remember from Florida was being at a kindergarten field trip at the Space Shuttle launch station in 1986, which I don't know how old you are, but that was when the Challenger blew up. And so I watched the Challenger space shuttle blow up on my kindergarten field trip there. And then next thing you know, we get into a moving van and move up to Washington State. And my mother was a single mother with three very high energy boys, and she ended up remarrying a very abusive man that appeared to have some money. And long story short, he was a guy that taught me how to take a hit at a very young age, and that learning how to protect myself from fighting from a corner was what led to my attitude and competitiveness in sports for the most part. And while it sucked going through that, I can tell you that guy helped drive me to the point that where I got to, that I was able to get into sports, the colleges I got into, and ultimately the community that I served in within the military. And there was a study that I saw that looks like upwards of 90% guys that go into, whether it's Rangers, Air Force Special Tactics, or Navy SEALs, all come from some sort of background similar to mine.
That's really interesting. I didn't realize it would be that high of a percent.
Well, I mean, you think about it, and I encourage you to go back and listen to Jocko and Dr. Kim's uh, podcast, because he talks about in there that, and this is the same for me. I wanted to make sure that I went to a community where I could learn how to always protect myself and those I loved at any cost. Well, what happens when you take, at the Ranger Battalion, type numbers, you take 700 guys where 90% of them are like that. You give them a bunch of training and a bunch of weapons and control over Air Force, planes. And then, have them go serve a purpose for a period of 10 years and then say, okay, now you're done. Well, what do you have left at that point? Well, in most cases, a recipe for disaster. And I think that's why, if you really dig down into the suicide numbers of, on average, the 22 veterans a day that kill themselves, the numbers that come from, special operations or tip of the spear units that I had the opportunity to serve in, they're severely misrepresented on the higher scale. And it's just because, we come out of those communities and we don't know how to decompress from it. We don't know how to ask for help, and we don't know how to function in a life where it's not, fight or flight and everything that we deal with. So unfortunately, yeah, I think, a lot of guys end up coming from those environments and we're kind of almost just drawn to it in a way. But yeah, it's unfortunately just the way it is.
Yeah. Speaking of Jocko, he's a really inspirational figure. Who do you draw your most inspiration from?
You know what? I'll tell you what, man. I draw my inspiration from anyone that refuses to accept, the status quo and goes about finding a different way to win. And so, some examples of people, Lucas Foster from U.S. Snowboard. That kid, I shouldn't say kid, man, young man. He's 19 years old now. He never even got into a half pipe until he was 15 years old because his parents didn't have the money to send him to ski resorts. And so he, got creative with Jumps There in Telluride, Colorado, where his father, was one of the managers at the Sheraton Hotel, to figure out how to do the basic stuff. And then by the time he was able to finally get in those situations, he had figured ways around it. And now he's one of the top riders in the United States. He just broke in the top 20 in the world this past season before they ended up shutting the season down early. Those are the type of people that I draw inspiration from, and Steve Nyman from U.S. Ski Team, various others, through athletes. I do find inspiration from guys like Jocko, because Jocko, his podcast is not about edifying himself. He talks very little about his role as a SEAL and what he did. It's more about teasing out these stories, and when applicable, he brings in his career. Those are the type of people that I draw inspiration from, because if somebody asks me, like, or I'll tell people, what, I'm average. And I see myself as a physically, mentally, academically average person. But I try really, really hard at everything that I do. And if the other people around me have no desire to raise up to average, that's not my problem. Right? I'm not going to lower my standards. And people that fall within that realm, and I'd say Jocko is probably, one of those types, are the types that I draw inspiration from. And so, I draw a lot more inspiration from these athletes I work at than they probably draw from me. I draw a lot more inspiration from some of these venture capitalists in San Francisco I've had an opportunity to work with, because I watch how they'll take these principles and learn from the principles that, that I'll talk about, and then apply them to their world to be, the best version of themselves within their quote unquote their athletic endeavors or their professional sports. Those are the people that I draw inspiration from, plain and simple. So they come from all over the place, man. There's all sorts out there. The athlete thing, it's convenient, it's there, it's in the public, and so it's easy to recognize. But the ones that come out of nowhere and just the dark horses, I guess, and that'd probably be the best way to describe it. The dark horses within any individual discipline. The people that come out of from nowhere and just work their butts off to be great at what they do. That's where I find inspiration.
Yeah, yeah, it's crazy how many people like that exist. I mean, just last interview, I had a guy. He flew around the world on a single engine plane at the age of like 17. Yeah, Ryan Campbell.
Wow. Yeah, I mean those, like, what, and so then for me, it's like I want to peel back what allowed them to do that. I want to know what they did and see what parts of that I can take in to implement into my journey. I mean, it's like the golf thing. That's like, I just started playing golf a year ago. Golf's a tough sport. Well, that's why I started playing it, because it's something that's not people. So what makes people good at it? And are there certain things that can be applied in that sport that are applied, to other sports? Same with snowboarding. I didn't snowboard up until 2018. That was the first season I tried it. And the whole scenario behind that coming to fruition is interesting within itself. But it's, things that I can find, where I can translate those skills on the rest of life, are the things that I love, to take on as hobbies or just experiment with. And with snowboarding, with golf, it's simply about the ability to be present. You're only going to be good at those two sports if you learn to have an ability to be present. Because if you're stuck in the past, depressed about the things that have happened, the things you've lost, the people you've lost, at the same time, you're scared to death out of the 99 things out of 100 in the future that are never going to happen, you're going to have an inability to be present and not be able to be effective at what you're doing. Works with snowboarding, works with golf, and honestly, man, works at everything in life.
Yeah, how many people do you usually coach?
Through, are you talking about overall through the company, or?
Well, mostly through snowboarding, but yeah, overall.
Yeah, so I mean, overall, there's probably about 10 individuals that I work with consistently, and then still ones that I'll follow up with that I've worked with in the past. From US and ski and snowboard, there's 5 athletes. that I'm currently active with, and then there's some people up in San Francisco that I've worked with, and then here in Dallas, and that's just the AM300 part. And if there's opportunities to work with veterans or something like that, I will take those opportunities anytime I can, because the stuff that I've fallen upon to, I'm just man, I am lucky to be alive at this point. And if there's someone that can benefit from it, I'm gonna try and pass it on as much as I can, especially from the veteran community.
Do you what's the best place you've traveled to so far?
Best place I've traveled to.
Yeah.
Depends on the scenario. If it's snowboarding,
Phoenix, right?
and Phoenix is interesting. I was there for the first 3 years after I retired, and I fought everything I could to get out of there, because for me that area was just so reminiscent of the terrain I experienced in the Middle East. And I moved there right after I retired, so I hadn't dealt with any of the trauma yet, and so Phoenix was a tough place for me to be, and it still is. My two daughters live there actually. I'm there up until this COVID thing went in. I was there at least twice a month. So Phoenix is tough. I would say, up in the mountains, Copper Mountain is probably my favorite Colorado destination, snowboard wise. Lake Tahoe, probably up in California, Whistler, all three of those places are just beauty beyond. Also, am active fly fisher, and so up in Colorado, there's a lot of places that I love to go fly fishing. With my father, who's also a disabled veteran, and him and I will take other fellow disabled veterans out and teach them how to fly fish. Once again, just to give them that sense of presence that comes within that hobby. So you ask for another hobby, well, there's another one: fly fishing. And why do I do
Yeah.
it? Because it's tough. Because you got to use flies. You got to trick the fish. It's not bait fishing. It's not flashy spinner cast. And a lot of the flies, I don't tie them myself. My father does. So, those are the types of places that I find beautiful. With golf, I've had an amazing opportunity to play some just immaculate, beautiful courses. My fiance is from Connecticut, so I'd have to say that's probably one of the prettier places, especially in the fall when all the leaves are coming down, that I've seen. But one thing about that, is, man, beauty is where you choose to find it, and that is something that took me a long time to get to, but it really is true.
Yeah, that's that's a good saying. But how long have you been fly fishing for? Cuz I've been fly fishing for quite a few years now.
Yeah, so I started back in 2010. I started when I was 7 years old. I was when I got my first fly rod and had grown up fly fishing, and then lost it when I was about probably 13 or 14 years old, and then didn't touch it again until I was at the Command General Staff College. I went out to Colorado for a vacation in 2010, and found it again, and kind of slowly started getting back into it. And that was one of the driving factors for wanting to get up to Colorado in 2015, was to be able to do it more often. And that was a place that my father and I really reconnected on. My father, I'd say I really didn't even know him until I was about 35 or 36 years old, and that came with the advent of reconnecting with fly fishing. So fly fishing definitely carries a special place in my heart, and it's tough, man. It's tough. Not everybody can do it, and that's what drives me to it, is the difficulty in it.
Yeah, yeah, my dad, he got me into it. He actually ties flies for me too. Have you ever fished over here in Arizona?
So I've gone up to Oak Creek Canyon.
Yeah, I was just there.
Yep. So I've got a little two weight little sage two weight that I use specifically for that little creek up there. I've been over to. I'm trying to think of what places over on the east side of the state that I fished. I think it starts with an S, but caught some mammoth trout. They're all stocked.
Oh,
Stocked.
Salt River?
Salt. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Up there. And then those are the only places. Oh, and then Lee's Ferry. Yep. I've fished in Lee's Ferry in the canyon, Glen Canyon.
Yeah, I haven't been up there yet. I heard it's really
Yeah,
good.
that's it, man. It's like you're in a piece of art. It's like you're in a painting through there. And the place, I think there's only one guy that you can fish with up there. And you get into a boat, and you've got 12 miles, and you go up to the entrance or where the dam is. And man, it feels like you're in a some sort of historical art piece, because you're right there in the canyon. You're looking up, 400 meters straight up on each side. and it's just amazing. You get an opportunity to go to Lee's Ferry. I think Lee's Ferry Anglers is the company up there, and man, it is worth the guide trip.
Yeah, I'll have to go. Or you said you're just getting into jujitsu, right?
Yeah, well, so I was into it when I was in the army. I got back into it in Colorado for about a year, and then just things got busy with when my work started amplifying with the U.S. ski and snowboard team, and I just finally found a place down here in Dallas, um, and but yeah, so the intention will be to try and find a place here in Dallas. But my oldest daughter Addison, she did Taekwondo for a bit, and she's going to start getting back into it. I tried so hard to push for the BJJ, but I have to probably settle with the Taekwondo. No offense to anybody; it's a great martial art as well. But yeah, man. Once this thing all clears up and we figure out a way to somehow roll safe, if you get a place up there you train, I'll definitely come up there and roll with you.
Yeah, for sure. There's a place over here in Surprise, Arizona, on the other side of the Phoenix Valley. It's called
Yeah.
Deboa.
What's the name of it?
Deboa.
Deboa. Okay.
Yeah, it's an
Trying to
awesome
remember
place if you ever find yourself out here.
well, yeah, so I actually lived in Peoria for
Oh, okay.
years. So I'm familiar with the area that you're in. So my
Perfect.
daughters live over now in Chandler. So the chances of getting up to the northwest part there of the valley are few and far between. But if there's a chance to roll, man, I will definitely take an opportunity to do that.
Yeah, for sure. I'd love to see you step in.
Yeah.
Um,
All about getting humbled any opportunity I can. That's how you get better, by getting your butt kicked, right?
yeah, yeah, that's the best part.
Yep. And then figuring out what they just did to you and figure out how to turn it on them. That's, I think, the better part. But yes, we're in agreement.
Yeah, cool, cool. So, yeah, man. If there's anything else you want to say, we can go ahead and wrap up with some final words.
No, I mean, I think I have been very blessed, with this opportunity to do what I do, and it was never an intention to do this stuff as a job or a book to be put out about it. But I just want to encourage you, what you're doing. And I'm a huge fan and proponent of this podcast system. In fact, there's one that I, sponsor and I help advocate for the metal mentality because the things you put out and the people that you bring on, I mean, they could have information that could be life saving, for someone else, and that's an incredible act of service in itself. And one of the things that I struggled with prior to starting this Phoenix project is that I was all about the destinations, the achievements, the awards, the success. And I briefly touched on it earlier about the difference between excellence and success. My whole focus was on success and that end state. Well, what I realized, in I guess probably late 2017 was, what if the goal, what if the award, the achievement is the journey or the process within it? And I think I finally realized that, and that's when things really kind of started, energizing or gaining momentum for me. And when working with these athletes, they have to have success. There's a focus on success in those communities because that's what gets sponsorships. That's what gets support, is winning medals, getting on podiums, all that stuff. Well, the problem is when you put your focus on success, who determines success? Usually it's human judges, right? So with snowboarders, for example, they have 3 judges that determine whether or not they make it on that podium. Now, those judges could have a bad day. They could just not like you, whatever. So if you're putting your entire validation based on quote unquote success, well, that's kind of setting you up for failure, in my opinion. But if you're living on the other side of that, where the focus is on excellence, and your focus is on just doing all these things you can to a very high standard, that's where all of a sudden, the successes are eventually going to start coming. Well, where is that found in? That's found in the process. Well, for you, doing a podcast is obviously a process. You're teasing out the processes of other people. Well, those are the things that can ultimately help save people's lives or make them make changes or give them that one idea that's a game changer that helps them propel forward in life. And so, I want to thank you for, what you're doing and, getting the word out of people. And while one person is definitely not going to have it all, if you interview enough people, you're probably going to put together, several little things that end up helping a lot of different people. And man, I think that's awesome. That's a calling right there. My stuff, you asked me, in an email earlier, like, how did you find your calling? Well, it's not necessarily calling. It's just, it's me refusing to be okay with just, the standard, and doing what I can to exceed that, and then ideally being of service to other people. And because, I mean, man, I have a tough time, acknowledging that I just went through some of the things I went through in life for no reason. Like, there's got to be a reason for it. And even if there wasn't a reason, I'm going to make some sort of reason out of it to attempt to help someone else. Because the last thing I want is someone to go through the same things I went through. And if they can learn from what I went through, then great. When I did my TED Talk, which was an incredible opportunity, I didn't even plan to say this, but at the very end, I said, listen, don't, and this is relevant to what we're going on to right now, because a lot of people are experiencing that burn down, right? The Phoenix bird, where everything that they've worked for is burning down to the ground. Well, I said at the end of my TED Talk, listen, don't start your Phoenix project where you are in life. You do not have to burn down to where I had to go to. And that's here currently. If you find yourself in a tailspin or something, you don't have to go all the way down to rock bottom, because I don't know about you, man, but I was born with a jackhammer at birth that when I hit rock bottom, I have the capacity to go another 20 feet deeper than anyone thinks their rock bottom is. And so, start building where you are, and take all these lessons learned that you can get from people in order to do that. So I think it's awesome what you're doing, and I thank you for your service.
Thank you for your service.
Well, it's, man, this is just an example of all the things that can happen when we just, come together. And I'm not talking about this, hippie, I don't want to call it left or anything like that, but, or liberal way, but it's about, man, when great minds come together around the common good of just helping out your buddy or helping out your brother, your sister on your right and left, it's pretty amazing what can end up happening. And man, I've seen it in full fruition with some of these Olympic athletes I work with, that the only thing in exchange that I ask of them is, when I work with them is, hey, come and visit some VAs with me. Come draw some inspiration from some of these vets. Come draw some of these inspiration from some of these military installations. And I don't know if you've had a chance to go and look at some of the stuff that I've done with them, but man, it's pretty awesome when they go in there and, they're signing autographs and their pictures are up on walls behind mental health desks. They're providing inspiration for people, and they know they've got something else to ride for other than a medal or a sponsorship or a team. And that's where things, I think, get a little bit special.
That's awesome, man. I think it's awesome that you're doing that, and you're really inspiring others develop themselves into a higher spot.
Well, thanks, man. It's, people like you that inspire me to keep going. It's like it's the good version of the one up game, right? Who can one up with being the better version of themselves? Well, that's an okay competition to have, because then we just end up, all making each other better.
All right. Well, thanks for being on the show.
Hey, my pleasure, man. I look forward to hearing your other podcasts, and seeing what other guests you get forward. And, if you ever see anybody, that I work with on my social media that is of interest to you, let me know. And if it fits, I'd be happy to make introductions as well.
For sure.